Welcome to the Paranormal Stakeout radio TV show with Larry Lawson. As a former career law enforcement officer and law enforcement educator, Larry focuses on the use of tried and true law enforcement investigative techniques in conducting paranormal investigations. Despite his experience and training, Larry also keeps an open mind to discussions on topics that deal with evidence that are not quite as physical in nature. Paranormal Stakeout guests are professionals in the field of the paranormal and parapsychology, conducting the investigations and research needed to further the cause of paranormal study. Larry advocates an agenda of standardization of structure and training in the field of paranormal investigation and research for the purpose of one day being able to produce the evidence needed to convince a jury of the existence of the paranormal. Whether it is ghosts, UFOs, unsolved mysteries, hauntings or cryptids, no topic is beyond the investigative reach of Larry Lawson and the Paranormal Stakeout radio TV show team. Now, here is the host of the Paranormal Stakeout radio TV show, Larry Lawson.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Paranormal Stakeout. I'm your host, Larry Lawson, coming to you from the headquarters of the Florida Bureau of Paranormal Investigation and Indian River Hauntings in beautiful Vero Beach, Florida, just a stone's throw south of Cape Canaveral, where we're seeing rockets go up every day. Maybe that's why we get so many UFO reports from around here. But that's not what we're going to talk about tonight. I've got a great show in store for you. I've got Mr. Steve Dills with us. Steve is a seasoned paranormal investigator with over a decade of experience, and his journey into the unknown began at a really, really young age. As a young child, he was often disrupted at night in his sleep with things that were happening that defied explanation. In about 2010, uh, Steve and some of his colleagues put together a team called Transcend Paranormal, which is an investigative team dedicated to exploring and understanding natural phenomenon. Now, in addition to that, they are also involved in a lot of historical restoration and events to help contribute to those historical buildings in their area. He's also, you'll see him on several TV shows on the YouTube. Ghost Finders and Eerie Encounters are a couple of them. But what really sets him apart is the scientific approach that he takes to his paranormal investigations. And folks, you know me, that's where I like to go. I'm a cop and I like things to be scientific in their methodology. But we're going to talk about that tonight because even my philosophy is changing a tad. But with that, I'd like to introduce Steve Dills to Paranormal Stakeout. Steve, welcome to the show.
Hey, Larry, thank you for having me.
Yeah, so how's everything up there in Virginia?
It's going wet. We've had a bunch of rain, so it's very wet and soggy, but can't complain. We're getting into spring.
Yeah, that's it's even starting to rain a little bit around here also. So you've been into this business, paranormal research, investigative world for about 10 years. Tell my audience a little bit about your background, how you got here, and what significant events really molded what you are today.
Yeah, so the biggest thing that kind of I guess drove me to the paranormal was my childhood. Um, I grew up right outside of Philadelphia, and uh, on gosh, I was young, but one of my birthdays, we up and moved here to Virginia. My father had a job opportunity that he could not pass up, and so you know how that goes. We all went, and so I remember being very depressed, anxious. Even as a child, I was like, all of my friends, my family, everything I know, my entire world is now going to be way over here, out of my reach. And this was a time when email was just coming about and everybody had their
Mm.
AOL email accounts. And so, I didn't really have a way to communicate with my friends like you do today, right? You can reach out and ping somebody half across the world. I
Yeah.
didn't have any of that. And that kind of, I guess, put me into this spot where I felt very anxious, depressed, scared, right? And so we moved into this house, and we were there for only 2 years, as my mother likes to put it, 2 years too long. But almost instantaneously, activity starts occurring. Um, I'm waking up to my name being whispered in my ear, and that progresses to being yelled and screamed into my ear, which was very terrifying as a child. Having my bedroom and my closet doors open and closed on themselves, having objects move around, and it wasn't just my bedroom; it was the entire house. But for whatever reason, it seemed to want to stem or uh, kind of culminate in this portion of our house, my room, of course. Like,
Hmm.
where else should it be? And so, you know, that just kind of having all these experiences as a kid got me into the field, because I was terrified. I was terrified to go home. I was terrified. I wanted to stay at school,
Hmm.
and that's like your home is supposed to be your safe place, right? Your
Yeah, your
haven from the
sanctuary.
world. Yes.
Sure.
But when you're going home and you're seeing doppelgangers of family pets, having things moved around the house, or watching, shadows, or in one case,
Hmm.
this massive orb, which is very odd. And I'm not saying like on a camera, like all the dust that people
So
see, but
you saw it with your eyes.
yes, it was about the size of a basketball.
Okay.
Uh,
Okay.
uh, Float into the room. That I was like, I'm done. Like, that scared me. And
Hmm.
so these things, like, it just, I guess it just kind of ignited a flame, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't something I was aware of prior. All of these things started occurring to myself and to,
Didn't happen up in Philadelphia at all.
nope, just this house.
Okay.
And so,
One quick. Go ahead.
oh no, go ahead. Oh, you,
Well, one question I got to ask you, and I'm sure you've had this question set to you a couple of times. You obviously experienced quite the trauma for a young. I'm assuming what you were 5, 6, 7 years old, right in that
yeah, I was
area.
young.
Okay. The move that, and that's traumatic. I totally get
Mhm.
that. Can you can you equate that emotional trauma as maybe something that triggered it, or might be the foundation for what happened at all? Have you ever looked at that at all?
That's actually why I say that, because
Okay.
I'm a firm believer that if you are going to go into a location to investigate, you shouldn't be feeling depressed or anxiety induced. If you're feeling these feelings, you should probably take a break.
Okay.
Because if you, I feel like what you put into the field is what you get out. What you put into investigating is what you get out. And so when you
Mhm.
go in and you're feeling anxiety, depressed, you're feeling all of these negative emotions, you're gonna have some sort of experience that is more negatively inclined. Now, is that something that's happening out here in the world around us or right here? Not sure. I think it's a mix of both. And so I think that a portion of what was going on was me creating some of these experiences, some of these things,
Okay.
right? Like I'm already in this bad space. And
Right.
so things that I'm experiencing, I'm already going to interpret as negative, right? Now,
Sure.
on the flip side, I also feel like that can stem things. That can, you know, kind of stir the pot a little bit and say, "Hey, I'm over here. How's it going?"
Mhm.
And so, not only was I having experiences, my mother, everybody except my
Okay.
father, because my father was like, "I don't see anything," uh, and so, and it wasn't until after we moved out of the house that he finally opened up, and he's like, "Yeah, there were some weird experiences," and I'm like,
Okay, so you weren't the only one experiencing these things.
"No, nope,
Okay. Okay. And you go back to some of the theories of poltergeists, and
yep."
that being young young ladies in particular at a certain age tends their energy tends to create these situations. Sounds like that may have been part of what was happening with you.
I think it's possible. I think because of the mindset that I was in, I think it's very,
Mhm.
very plausible idea.
Mm.
I wish I could go back and test it and be like, all right, well,
Mm.
let's see. Um, but I think that it was a mix of, there were other things going on in the house. Mix that in with kind of my own headspace, and it's like, all right, perfect storm. And
Mhm.
then as a young child, you know, it's almost impossible to discern between one or the other because you have no idea, right? Now
Mhm.
we are able to look back and say, oh, you know what, I think that's a mix of this, or it could have been this, or it could have been that, and put something more tangible around it. But as a kid, oh my god, I was absolutely, the house was
Yeah.
horrific. I refused to be in there by myself.
Uh,
Um, it was wild.
was there a history to the house?
So the house was newly built. The house
Okay.
was just built. It was one of the last remaining houses in the neighborhood that was just sitting there. Nobody had purchased it. It did have a very very weird layout, which I think probably uh, kind of in part is why it didn't get off of the market so quickly.
Mhm,
Um, on the flip side, my parents were looking for a place very quickly to just move in so that we could get settled into the area and
sure.
then start looking for a more permanent house. And so we moved in with the intention of not staying there very long. We were there for 2 years. And during that time, my parents had actually had a house built on a larger piece of property. And so we were there for just a very short period of time, but it was just enough for me to kind of like get that interest. Now, while the house doesn't have any activity or any history, the grounds, in Virginia, you can't spit without sitting something Civil War
Mm,
or even Rev War, and so there were no battles on that property that I was able to locate. However, I do
mhm,
know that there was troop movement and encampments right in that area. So it's possible that it's something from that time period. Um,
mhm.
it's difficult because I've not had access to go back. Um, and I'm not gonna go knock on their door and be like, "Hey, listen, I grew up here as a kid. Your house is absolutely
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
can I come
Yeah.
in?" Um, they'd probably call the cops on me. Uh,
Mhm,
but I think that it is tied to if there's anything that's actively there, I think it's tied to the land and just
mhm.
what occurred there prior to because this was some low land, and so when they started developing it, they came in and just dumped dirt everywhere, and then built the houses up in big, massive neighborhoods. So
And I agree with you. I think that's something a lot of folks in the paranormal research field they tend to forget. Oftentimes, it's the land, not the building itself.
or
And
something that was
so
there prior.
mhm. And I like your ability to discern and able to look at emotional triggers as well as possible paranormal activity and looking to be able to separate the two. And you said something that was really interesting, and I want to get into this later in the show, and that's repeating it.
Hmm.
And I noticed in your res, you you try to use scientific methods to substantiate evidence. Well, the
Hmm.
biggest problem we have in the field today is being able to repeat it and sticking
Yes.
truly with the scientific method, and that's a huge issue.
Yep.
So I don't want to get too too far ahead of us
You're like,
because I
let's
got lots
go.
of well, I got lots to talk about. So, do the experience you had the experience as a child, it continued on, I'm assuming, even after you left the house?
Nope. Nope. We moved out of the house. Absolutely no more activity. But it was enough, and so I guess lost that fear after a while, and it turned into fascination, and it turned into why did that happen to me? Why did that happen
Mhm,
here? Why did that happen to me? How did it happen? What is this? And so I took that, and you know some of the very early TV shows on paranormal were coming out. This was before
mhm.
Ghost Hunters, all this sort of stuff, and so I started doing my own digging and diving, and finally grew to the age that I was able to get a car, and
Mm.
I moved out and I
Oh,
got into
that's right.
college,
Ah,
and that's when I started hitting the road. I
well, that's, and I gotta cut you off here because 'cause we're about ready to take our first break. It goes quick. But when we get
that's
back, I wanna talk a little bit more about how you developed yourself and trained yourself in the field. So, folks, Steve Dills from Transcend Paranormal. Interesting conversation. Stay tuned. We'll be back after these messages. And we are back on Paranormal Stakeout with my guest tonight, Steve Dills from Transcend Paranormal up in Richmond, Virginia. Steve, getting back into your background, and I appreciate you talking about it because I think a lot of people have things that occur to them and they don't like talking about it. They don't
mhm,
like telling other people. And I think when that occurs, when people do talk about it, they start to feel better and open up themselves. Myself,
yep.
I did not have my first experience until I was in law enforcement, oddly enough.
Oh,
I had
really?
yeah, my mom was very in tune with strange occurrences, but it wasn't anything I experienced until after I was in law enforcement. But so many folks have that experience that you did as a child. Now,
Mhm.
in these experiences in your home, and don't need to go into detail if you don't want to, but were you ever touched or physically harmed at all?
Um, I had one experience um, that I can remember, and I wasn't hurt, but it was something that to me was, I guess, being told this story was significant. I was, sleeping in bed, and as parents do, they come in the morning to get you up and get you ready for school, and time to get up.
Mhm.
And I remember for I'm thinking like when my mother used to wake me up, she had this horrible song. So if you're watching, Mom, it was a great song. But uh, she'd open the door and turn on the lights. And this particular morning, instead of seeing me lying on the bed or in the bed, uh, there was a giant poster. It was one of those posters that you would enclose, put the plastic casing on it
Okay.
and everything, and that hung over my bed. And it was just some typical boy stuff. It had a baseball bat and I think a pair of rollerblades and a soccer ball, just like kid stuff.
Mhm.
And somehow at some point in the evening, it fell onto me, but not in such a way. And I was just in a single twin bed, nothing massive. So this would have been the perfect balancing act, right? But the way that it fell, it actually was face up when it landed on me. So somehow, and this was just on a single nail, somehow it lifted off of the nail. The wire came up enough, and then when it fell like if this is the front of the
Right?
picture, it fell like this, so that the top of the picture was on my head, and it was facing upwards, so that when she walked in, she saw the baseball bat and the all of the
You weren't awake.
nope, I was asleep. So somehow the nail was still in the wall, and this poster had made its way onto me
Mhm.
uh, without waking me up. Can one would presume that if it was you had something fall on you, you'd probably wake up.
And
And that was a very weird experience.
was the nail still in the wall?
Hmm.
So, okay, okay.
Yep. And so that was something that obviously I was asleep, so I wasn't aware of it. Uh,
Mhm.
but this is something like as I got older, my mother told me, she's like, this is really weird, but let me share this with you. And so she kind of dismissed it, didn't say anything to me that particular day because she didn't want me scared. I was already terrified of the house, but uh, she she kind of held it for a little bit and then finally shared it. And it was like just lined up with all the other weird experiences in that house. And ultimately, like I said, that kind of drove my why. um,
Mhm.
and I knew that I wanted to get into the field. I had to wait until I was in college, kind of on my own, where you know my parents didn't know that I was out until all hours of the night investigating. And granted, I wasn't drinking, so I guess that's something, right? Um, but I was able to take myself and go and start experiencing locations and investigating on my own. And that's when, you know, after doing this for a year or so and investigating with tons of random folks that I didn't know,
Mhm.
I finally realized like, if I'm going to do this seriously, I need to have a team of people that kind of have the same thoughts and ideas, and we'll have each other's backs and we can support each other, um, and do this in a way that we can use our experiences, right? Our scars to help other people. Because that's what I wanted to do. The ultimate goal was to help other folks and uh, make sure other people don't feel like their home is a place of fear. Um, and that's a big reason that I got into it. The
So
sac-
how did you
okay.
pick these folks? How did you pick these folks to become part of Transcend? It was 2010, I believe, so you've been doing it for a
Yeah.
while.
So we actually investigated in this group called the Richmond Paranormal Society.
Mhm.
And at that time it had been formed and there was thousands of people in this group. It was a meetup group, if you ever used meetup way back in the day. And so uh it was basically this massive group of anybody and everybody that was, you know, interested in the paranormal,
Mm.
dark tourists, um and I call dark tourism like folks that like go on ghost tours and all that sort of stuff. Um
Okay.
anything from people that had been investigating already. It was a massive group, and so let's say they found a place that they wanted to investigate. Somebody would line it up, and then they'd say, okay, the first 10 people they posted out in this group, 10 people that reply get to go. And
Mm,
I work in IT, so I'm always on the computer. So I had a fairly good chance of being one of those folks. And so I started doing these investigations, and we'd head to a few different locations around here. And I very quickly realized that every single time I would be investigating with sometimes some of the same people, some of the same folks, but then more often than not, it was just be random people that I had never met and I probably wouldn't see again. And I realized that if I'm going to go into a space and it's pitch black, I can't see anybody around me, I probably should do so with people that I know. And so, after kind of chatting with some of the folks on these investigations and some of the people that I had seen, kind of recurring, we
mhm.
decided, hey, you know what, we're gonna do our own thing. And there was just four of us, and we decided we're gonna take off. We're gonna start investigating ourselves, and build kind of some solidity around this, and we did that actually in 2007, 2007, 2008. So there was a couple of years prior where we were just kind of doing our own thing, and we didn't really have a team per se. We were just us, just doing,
Mhm.
going to
Okay.
places. Um, and then 2010, we're like, let's just make it official. Let's, if we're gonna do this, like we've been doing this, we work together well, let's do this. And so that's when we kind of formed the team. And then we've been growing ever since. We're close to like 30 members now, which is a little
Oh my.
crazy. It's a big team.
Yeah.
But we're all adults, and everybody is here with a shared goal, which is really nice. And so we all get along and work towards our mission of helping folks and helping historical locations.
So you put this team together. 30 is a big crew. I've got about
It is.
12, and sometimes that can get a little unwieldy. But there's a lot of folks that listen to this show that have an interest in doing research. Many of them are very serious about it. Some are what I like to refer to as paranormal thrill seekers, folks that just like to go out, hear the bump in the night.
Hmm.
But all of them have a good heart that we deal with. How do you train yourself to become more professional? And then I want to kind of move into what your methodology is, how you investigate. How,
Yeah.
let's start off by talking about how you train your members.
So it's a very interesting topic because a lot of times when teams start out and they're very fresh, you kind of stumble around a lot. One of the big things that we talk about, and how we operate as a team, is acting in such a way that it's a business. We are not a business. This is a passion. This is a huge hobby, a passion, right? None
Mhm.
of us make money. We lose money. We throw it into travel and gas and hotel stays, but we try to act professional in the sense that this is how we would operate if we were in an office space.
You
Um,
charge? Do you charge for an
no,
investigation?
nope,
Okay,
no, no, no,
good,
never, never, never.
good.
And so we say, okay, obviously some of the easy things. We're not swearing. We're not talking about politics. Some of these sorts of things. Um, but then we also kind of have these team investigations or team building sessions where we'll go into a location. We've got a few quote unquote home locations that we'll investigate. And when we go there, we work together as a team to kind of just, I guess, standardize and formalize how we engage. Whether it's a client, whether it's the public on a public investigation. And so some of the things that we do is, and we didn't start off with this, to be very clear. It took some trial by fire and learning from getting burned on some things, but extent excuse me, extensive client interviews, right? And
Mhm.
that's for historical locations as well as private residences. So we have a very strenuous, and I hate to use that word, but is a lot more lengthy than a lot of the teams I've seen, um, interview process. It's
Mhm.
not like, okay, hey, listen, we think we have 10 ghosts at our house. We need you to come over. A lot of people will be like, we'll be right there. We're like, all right, hold up. Let's talk about this. And so we have a very lengthy process of interviewing before we even step foot on the property.
Why? Why? Tell us why. I think people need to hear
It's
this.
a great question. Because you don't want to get caught with your pants down, I think is a very safe way to say that. When you get on site for some of these locations, it's not always safe. It's not always safe for you. It's not always safe for your team members. And there's a few different ways that that can be unsafe. The majority of it is human people, other folks. One of the things that we're always looking for when we perform these interviews is people that are thrill seeking. And I'm not in the same way that some of your viewers are, but I'm talking about um, we had one particular case where we went out, and I love using this as an example. We went out, knocked on the door. The homeowner greeted us with a glass of wine. She's already
Ah,
standing there. She's got a glass of wine in her hand. She's like, "Hey, how's it going?" We're like, "Good. We're here to investigate."
mhm.
She invites us in, and we walk in, and there's about 4 or 5 other women sitting at a kitchen table right off to the left hand side. They've all got a
Yeah.
couple bottles of wine. They're all drinking. They're having a good time. And she's like, "Okay, is this all of you?" And I said, "Well, yeah." And she's like, "Well, what time do the camera crews get here?" And I said, "Excuse me, what do you mean?" She's like, "Well, you guys, you know, do ghost hunts, right?" And I said, "Well, yeah, that's what we're here for." And she's like, "Yeah, but when are the TV folks going to get here? When are the cameras going to get here? I hope you don't mind. I brought some of my friends over because they wanted to see you guys, film and do this." And I was like, "I'm sorry. I think you get the wrong idea." Um, and so we left. I was like, "I'm not doing this." But I think there's a portion that are looking for thrill seeking in that aspect. Some folks are just looking for validation. It doesn't matter what you say. It doesn't matter if it's a cracked window and that's why there is a breeze coming through every 10 seconds. They are just looking for you to validate what they're experiencing, not what's actually occurring. There's other experiences where there's drug use, and that is both illegal drug use and prescribed prescription drug use, and
And
those can both be issues.
and those are all really important, and I'm really glad you brought them up. But we're about ready to take our next break. So
All good.
we're gonna pick this topic up when we get back, so folks stay with us. I'm with Steve Dills, Transcend Paranormal out of Virginia. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back, folks. I'm with my guest tonight, Steve Dills, and we had to break there really on I thought an important topic. And you were talking about discernment here, determining
Yep.
what type of situation you're stepping into. And you talked about safety, of the location, the condition of the resident, the homeowner, the
Yep.
representative, however. And that's a tough question, isn't it? To try and find out if there's any kind of legal or prescribed drug use
Hmm.
in the place that could cause an issue.
Yes.
Have you ever had any problems discussing that with folks?
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. We had another case where we went out and this couple, brought us into their home, and they're sharing all of these experiences that they're having, right? And that's
Mhm.
great. We're gonna get ready to investigate, and he's like, "Oh, by the way, we also have a lot of activity out in the woods out back." And so I said, "Well, why don't you walk us back there?" And he's like, "Yeah, sure." So we walk out back, and again, I'm not. Whatever you want to do is whatever you want to do. With your body, so long as you're not hurting or harming anybody else. But we walk out back, and there's a number of big trees, and behind each one of them, when we walk out further into the woods, are marijuana plants, and there was a boatload of them. And this was still when it was illegal here in Virginia, and I am not the kind that wants to go to jail because I was hunting ghosts and there's marijuana growing everywhere. Uh, and so I was like, "I'm sorry, we're gonna have to leave." And I think he understood. It wasn't anything that we disregarded his experiences or their experiences, but it was
Mhm.
something that we couldn't be there. Something like this, when you have mind altering substances in play and you're also saying you're experiencing things, how do you discern between the two? And you can't.
Well said. Okay, well said.
So, you've got that. And then you've got, let's say somebody is taking a number of prescribed drugs.
Mhm.
It is very hard to identify, okay, well, these two or these three are going to interact with each other in such a way that they can cause audible or visual hallucinations. And so we actually have we share with a another team here named CPRI. we share a
Mhm.
doctor that they have available, and we can reach out with her and say, hey, listen, I need to get in a little bit of information on this, and this.
What
Tell me
type of
what you think.
doctor? What
Um,
medical doctor?
yes, medical doctor.
Okay, okay.
And so she'll kind of give us some information and say, hey, this is what this could do. This is what this, based
Interesting.
off of what they're saying, etc. And that
Mhm.
gives us a good basis of, do we move forward with the investigation? The other piece around this is, and it can be rough, but depression, right? There are a number of states, and this is where it's very important to know the laws of the state that you're investigating within. But here in Virginia, let's say you go into a location and somebody is depressed. They're you know in a mental state, and because of the investigation, they end up hurting or harming themselves. You can now be held liable for that, and there are not a lot of people that realize that.
I am absolutely thrilled that you brought that up because that is a huge bugaboo of mine. Um, d there are so many teams out there, and there's not a lot of training. There's not a lot of understanding of, health and psychological issues. Unfortunately, because of my profession,
Yeah, you're
that I
aware of
retired
it.
from, but so often people will go and investigate homes, maybe not do the questionnaire that you do. We do the same thing, I might add,
Mhm.
and they end up causing more harm to somebody. Now, in
Yes.
addition to the mere fact that these people could be pushed over to the and do something, we're also harming them. I've seen teams go in and say, "Your problem is solved. The issue here is gone."
Hmm.
And 6 weeks later, "Oh, it's back, but they told me it was gone." And that can if somebody's already suffering from depression, that can also fill them with more hopelessness and
Yes, they can. And I feel like it's almost false promises in a way, because you're telling somebody, okay, we've identified what it is. It's, great grandma, Winnie over here. But who's to say that that's accurate, right? And on top of that, I don't know. I feel like you're putting something out there that isn't necessarily always true. And in
Mhm,
a sense, you can, like you said, you can do more harm than good. I've walked into cases where somebody already had a team out there, and for one reason or another, they stopped working with that team and then reached out to us.
mhm,
And they say, okay, well, we were told that we have a demon in our house. And I'm like, that's good, that's great, that's exactly what you want to hear as a homeowner, because you're already freaked out, and what's better than having a demon as a roommate? So, you know things like that, people like that is one of the big things, is when we investigate as a team, especially we go into residential cases, we keep all of that to ourselves. whatever we
mhm.
whatever we
Okay.
think we're feeling, whatever we think we're interacting with, we kind of let the data and what we get in our findings, let that lead the discussion. And there's nothing in there where we're going to say, okay, we're dealing with something evil in your home, because you get to leave at the end of the night. They don't. They have to live here. And so you're putting people into this negative position, this really bad spot, where now they feel vulnerable. They don't want to live where they live. And I don't know. I think that that's a really disrespectful, and I think really harmful way of going about investigating.
What do you tell your clients you can or can't do? What do you explain to them?
We never say, so first off, I've seen teams claim that they can remove things like a
Mhm,
like a vacuum. You come in, you're like a maid service. We do not say that. Um, I don't, just personally, my own personal beliefs. So sorry, everybody, but I don't think that there is any tried and true proven method that says, okay, well, if I wave this sage around, or if I open the doors and put crystals or salt at the bottom of the doorways, that means that the ghosts are gone. First off, that begs the whole question. And gosh, like I told you before, this is a whole long thing. But what is a ghost, right? That
m'kay.
is a huge question, and I don't necessarily pertain to the normal belief system. But
Alice,
secondly,
what do you think? Well, let's stop there for a second. What do you think this phenomenon that we call ghosts, apparitions, spirits, what do you think it is? What is your personal
I
thought?
honestly have no idea. And I feel like a lot of people will be like, "Well, you don't know what the heck," and I feel like that is a very sane thing to say. I don't know what it is yet, and I'll tell you why. Because I have not yet, in my own personal experience, I have not had a ghost walk out of a wall and say, "Hi, my name is blank. I lived, X and X years ago. Here's my information. You can find me using whatever." I've not had that, right? We go and we have these experiences. We have items moving, or we have, um, an EVP, or we have a spike in environmental data. That's great. That's all interesting things. But that doesn't necessarily mean that this is a person that has once been alive and is now dead. Like, there's to me nothing stating that a ghost has to be a human that is no longer alive. It could be any sorts of things, right? That could be anything ranging from we're all going crazy and mad
Hmm.
to there are uh just I mean we're still learning things in the scientific field to this day, right? We're at a best guess kind of system here, right?
Could it be, could it be us, Steve? Could it be us?
Sure, why
Could it
not?
be that? Could it be the power of our own untapped power of our own mind doing
Sure.
things?
It could be that. It could be I mean, it could be if you go with the idea of stone tape theory, it could be something like that. One of my favorites is the idea of quantum mechanics, which we already
Hmm.
know is a thing. We already have quantum computers. And we know that objects can be in two places in space at the same time, right? They can maintain space in two places at one time. Now, granted, that is on a very microscopic level, but that is just our understanding. We are still a very primitive species, right? We are uh, technology wielding monkeys, right? Our brains are not evolved yet, way past caveman days, because it takes hundreds of thousands of years to evolve. And so now we've got all this technology, but we're still driven. It's the same reason why people are afraid of the dark, right? I'm in my room here. If I turn off
Hmm.
the lights, there is nothing that I should be afraid of. Yet my kids will walk in and they're afraid. Why? That is something that has been passed down, right, in our DNA. That
Right.
okay, well,
Hmm.
we're afraid of mountain lions. We're afraid of bears attacking. Well, there's no bears or mountain lions in my room here in Virginia. And I
Hmm.
mean, granted, if there were, that'd be a problem, but there are not. And so it's to me, it's difficult to say this is what it is, right? Because that is a very definitive statement, and I don't think that there's enough data to say, yeah, that is this. This is your grandmother. Um, I think that it could be anything from parallel dimensions to extra dimensional, right? We're three-dimensional creatures. Well, technically four if you consider time, but that's more of a vector. And so who's to say that there's not extra dimensions if you go the route of string theory, right? Which
Okay.
which denotes anything upwards from 21 to 23 dimensions, and we're not talking about Marvel Cinematic Universe dimensions here. We're talking about things that we are experiencing our own physics, our own physics of the universe that we just don't quite understand yet, or we can't grasp currently.
And I can already tell we're not going to get into the details of equipment that we.
And
I can
that
already.
would be like so long.
Okay. Yeah. But the mere fact that this field and some people don't even like to use that term field, but this study of the paranormal, yeah, we've got equipment that have maybe a few more lights on it, a few more noisemakers, but essentially our equipment hasn't changed in 20 years when you really think about it.
Mm-mm.
And you were just discussing about our intellectual movement forward and the things that we're discovering. Is the equipment really going to be the answer, or is it going to be the return of a more natural view? Or
I
am I making sense? Do you see what I'm
Yes.
saying?
I think the equipment, a lot of the equipment today, and not to bash anybody, um, 'cause I love everyone, but uh, I think a lot of the equipment today is the same thing as like text messaging. It's instant gratification, and so we see everything from EMF detectors that are unshielded, picking up everyone's cell phones as they get notifications on their phone. and they're going off, and now that's paranormal activity, to cat balls, and my team knows how much I love cat balls. I don't. That's sarcasm. Um, and them going off, and that signifying that, oh yes, a grown dead adult wants to play with a cat ball on the ground, and that is their desire, is to play and kick that thing around.
On that thought, on the cat ball thought, it's time to take our last break. We're going to pick this up on the other side, though. So stay with us, folks. Very intriguing conversation, a little bit eye opening. Stay with us. We'll be right back. And we're back, folks, for our last segment here tonight. And before we do a little bit of housekeeping, I want to invite anybody that'd like to learn a little bit more about my organization. You can check us out at paranormalfbi.com or indianriverhauntings.com. And you can also get us on Facebook at Indian River Hauntings or Florida Bureau of Paranormal Investigation. We have a YouTube channel at Indian River Hauntings 2341 if you'd like to see some of the stuff that we've done. And you can also email me here at the X Zone. If you got questions, thoughts, or comments, you can get a hold of me at ghostguy@paranormalstakeout.org. And I would be remiss not to invite you to look at all the other great programming on the X Zone Radio and TV network. And you can check those out by going to xzbn.net to see all the great programming on the station. And Steve, if you can take a second to tell folks how they can find you if they have questions, thoughts,
Yeah,
or
sure.
some of your shows.
So you can find me on Facebook, Steve Dills. You can also find me Transcend Paranormal, transcendparanormal.com. And we're on all of the social media as Transcend Paranormal. You can also find myself and my co-host Chris Vaughn. We have a little kind of a comedic approach to the paranormal called Eerie Encounters, and that's on Facebook as well as YouTube, Eerie Encounters. And then lastly, on kind of my serious approach to the paranormal, I am on the television show The Ghost Finders. You can find us on theghostfinders.com, as well as on Facebook, and you can find those episodes on the Spirit channel, on Roku devices, and on the internet now just recently, as well as on Paraflix.
Excellent, excellent. And I want to get into that a little bit more in just a second, but I want to kind of
Mhm.
wrap this discussion up about where we're going with equipment and where the future lies with that equipment. Are we ever going to get any better at it? I mean, when it comes to developing equipment, do you see us ever reaching a point where something developed by us actually works?
I think so.
Definitively.
I think so. And the reason I say this is because I'm, like I said, I call it the blinky light things, and I'm not a huge fan of the blinky light stuff. I think from the instant gratification, sure, it's exciting. However, I think that if we were to turn our focus away from, what is going on immediately, and having the immediate response, and saying over a period of time, what are we experiencing, and using data loggers, I think that is where we're going to find some interesting data. I think that's where we're going to find some interesting details.
Talk to me about data loggers. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so environmental data loggers. I own and I love the
EDI.
EDI Plus.
Yeah,
Um,
that's my favorite piece of equipment, actually.
it's great, and there are other data loggers. So don't feel, folks, like, if you want to get into looking at the environmental data, that you have to go that route, because I know that a lot of times they're sold out. The thing I love about the EDI Plus is it is an entry into data logging. It is not very expensive. There are some very expensive data loggers, and the EDI Plus is a very inexpensive way to get started. So I do love it, because of that. I think it's very interesting when you set one of those things down. You don't pick it up and move it. I've seen people
Nope.
moving them, carrying them around everywhere. But looking at things like barometric pressure, temperature, if
Humidity.
there's anything's moving, humidity, looking at all of these things across the evening, and saying, okay, we have a spike here, 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 and then going back in your data, and your video recordings, audio recordings, did I experience anything at that moment in time? And I
Mhm.
think that, to me, is where we're going to find a little bit more of the set in stone kind of, okay, this is anomalous behavior, this is not normal for this environment. And
And
that could be, go ahead.
no, let's say the best thing about the EDI, I think we need to bring up is you put an SD card in it
Hmm.
and you put it in, you hit record,
Graph it all.
and and you can even have an experience yourself. You get an EVP, you hear a voice, something moves. but then you can go back and
Mhm.
look at the data and see at that same time, maybe the temperature dropped, maybe there was a
Yes,
vibration, all
exactly.
correlating data. Okay.
And that is something that, again, I'll throw CPRI's name out there. Um, Great folks, very, very scientific driven. And one of the interesting things that they have found, and then we've been finding following up on their research, is spikes in barometric pressure as well as spikes in ionizing radiation immediately during, prior, or immediately after some sort of preternatural activity, some sort of anomalous behavior in the environment. And that could be anything from hearing footsteps, an EVP, whatever, right? But we're
Mhm,
seeing spikes in something in the environment. And to
mhm.
me, that's wildly interesting. You know, I love history. I love taking things from a historical standpoint.
You
However,
have to.
seeing the data on this and saying, okay, well, we heard footsteps, and at the same time, we're seeing a spike in ionizing radiation.
Mhm.
That is wild. Like that is something. Now I have something tangible. I can pick this up,
Exactly.
hold it. I can look at it, and I can say, look, I got a data point that says this shouldn't happen. We shouldn't see,
Mhm,
you know, ionizing radiation of this magnitude on the second floor of a building where the base reading is 5. You know,
mhm,
you should not see that. And now here we are. And for 1 second, if you stood there, you probably could no longer have kids. But but the point still stands. And we've, to that effect of going back and going back and going back and trying these things. We've investigated some of these locations for well over 12 years, where we've
mhm,
set up the data, the equipment the same way to see, did we get false reports? Is this something that we can reproduce? Is this something that, what, the equipment was buggy that night or something? And it's
mhm,
interesting. I mean, there are nights where we'll get one or two spikes, nights where we'll get nothing. Um,
mhm,
but it's always interesting because it tends to be around when an experience, something anomalous is occurring in the environment. And to me, that's where I see progress can be made, is utilizing tried and true actual scientific
mhm,
approach. Now, that does not mean that, I'm a firm believer that there's more than one way to skin a cat. And I don't want to discredit or discount anybody. So if there are folks that are mediums or psychics, granted, there's a small subset of people that I feel like may be gifted in that. But I don't, I take everything with a grain of salt. And so, some of the interesting things that I'd love to see, and some of the things that we've discussed as a team is, okay, when you are, you know, going through that mediumship, when you're going through that and you're picking up information or whatnot, first off, not just taking that, oh yeah, it is little Jimmy. But can we find historical context on this? Does this make sense with the location? If not, what exactly is this that we're
mhm,
picking up? Is this just, you know, for lack of a better term, junk? But then,
mhm,
secondly, what's going on in the environment around them at that same time? Are we seeing spikes in something when they're doing, this, performing this reading, that they're getting this information? And so, a lot of people say that you can't apply the metaphysical because that is very pseudo, um, to a scientific approach. I think you can. It is a little clunky and weird. But I do find it very interesting when you take the experiences that folks have had from that side of the field, take the science and the history, and look at them all across the board and say, okay, well, that's interesting because, we did have and I'm going to take this from the tavern, a Cleaver's Chisholm here. Somebody got the name Clive, and that's what he used to go by as his nickname. And we also saw a spike in, barometric pressure at the same time that they're starting to pick this stuff up. Um, to me, like, if I can look at that all across the board, it's interesting. So
and I agree, and yes, it's tough to apply the scientific method to what we do, but I think by working together, we can find a way to do that, and that's where we have to go. So into this next question then, how do we police ourselves? How do we get to the point where we're all on the same page? We're all we that doesn't mean we have to have different philosophies, that
yeah,
doesn't mean we have to be all robots, but we've gotta have some sort of foundation. We've also gotta get rid of the frauds, the charlatans, the people that maybe
that's
even even aren't don't intend to hurt somebody, but they do
Nope.
because of how they handle themselves. How do we police ourselves, Steve Dills?
That is a great question. That's the $1,000,000 question. I'm not sure. I wish I had an answer on how do we make sure that, and not like you said, not something that we're, everybody must do this. You must take off your shoes. You must turn left 3 times
Right.
before you enter the building. Um, but to the point that we standardize the data so that, and it's not necessarily the data, but how we collect that.
Thank
Um,
you.
and I think by to me, it's just sharing knowledge. I think I've seen tons of teams and tons of individuals where they'll have some sort of piece of information, right? And they'll be like, well, this is my piece of information. I'm gonna hold this over here away from everybody. And I'm not gonna tell anybody about this, but it could benefit everybody, but I don't care, it's mine. Um I think that is harmful. I think it's detrimental. And I think, it's the same thing as to me where you say, well, I'm valuable at my job because I'm the only one that knows how to do it because I haven't taught anybody else how to do it. That's not true, and you can be easily replaced. And I think that we need to get away from, set egos aside, set aside all of that stuff and that muck, and say, hey, listen, this is interesting. Everybody, take a look at this. Um, we also, as a whole, need to be open to discussion. There's a lot of people that will clam up immediately when you say, you know what, I think that that's actually dust, or I think that that's a spider very close to the lens. And I'm referring to like ring cameras. Uh, but there are people that just they want to believe, regardless of if it's true or not, regardless of if that is dust, right? Or
Mhm.
that is mold or mildew or whatever. It does not matter. They will not listen to you because this is what they want to believe. This is what they need to believe.
And we've got that on both sides, don't we? We've got some folks that even the slightest bump is Aunt Gertrude coming back to visit, and you can't
Hmm.
convince them otherwise. And you've got other folks, how I like to describe it, if Abe Lincoln came down, pulled out a chair, sat down, said, you described it earlier, sort of,
Yep.
my name's Abe, and this is where I'm at, and this is what happened to the other side, and here I am. Even if it happened to somebody right in front of them, they wouldn't believe it either. So we've got it on both sides, and we've got to come together because nobody can deny something's happening.
Yes. And I think that's the thing is you look back generations after generations after generations after generations, hundreds of thousands of years, and you see that these experiences are shared, right? These
Mhm.
things are shared, and they're not shared in the sense that, you know, somebody had this experience over here and they wrote it down and sent it over here. No, these people are having experiences all across the world that are very similar in activity. And I think the sooner that we're more open to sharing information
Mhm.
and knowledge, and also, being honest and truthful with ourselves and questioning what are we experiencing? Are we
Mhm.
when we walk into locations, a lot of people don't realize that some of these older locations that we're walking into, as much as we love these historical locations, we are already building a pre bias. We're setting ourselves up to experience
Yeah,
something,
we are.
right?
And and with that, my friend, that's a great unfortunately, we gotta come to an end, but it's a great way to end it.
Come back
This
next
is
time.
yeah, come back next time. It's been an interesting conversation. I wanna thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
And folks, thank you for joining us. I wanna take 1 second to remind everybody of something. There's a lot going on in the world today, and we gotta keep all of this in perspective. Please help one another. Please be kind to one another. Hug your kids, love your family, because folks, that's where it's at. But keep all of this in perspective and understand the world that's going on around us is a tough place right now. So with that, take care, have a great night, and we'll see you on the other side. Good night, all.